I'd like to extend everyone a warm welcome to our DCS Turns 50 anniversary launch celebration. Thank you all so much for coming, and especially to our alumni and friends that have come home for this event. It's great to see you all. The strength of the department has really been its people from the start, including alumni, students, faculty, and staff that have established our department as not only the top computer science department in Canada, but one of the top computer science departments in the world. If you look at the department's website, you'll see an interactive timeline that lets you trace through some of the department's milestones over the last 50 years. It's really been a remarkable 50 years, and you've all played an important role in shaping this great department, none more so than Kelly Gottlieb, DCS co-founder and our first department chair. Kelly, if I could get you to stand up, please. Kelly's been here since day one of the 50 years. Remarkable. The future of our discipline is incredibly exciting. As we recently heard from one of our alumni, SUNY Buffalo President Satish Tripathi, in our anniversary distinguished lecture series, our discipline has a central role to play at a large research university like U of T. There's really not a corner of the university that's not feeling the pressure of computing and big data. But this should not be seen as pressure, but rather as opportunity, and to realize the potential of computing across the many disciplines at this university requires the leadership of a world-class computer science department, and that would be us. Obviously, the influence of computing extends well beyond the university. Computing is now an integral part of our phones, our cars, our homes, our healthcare, our transportation, our communication, our cities, and our environment. Like it or not, computing is poised to affect almost everything we do in our lives. Tonight we focus on the future of our discipline. And just as our first 50 years has boasted some of the greatest pioneers of computing, we also have the new pioneers that are defining the future of computing. We'll soon hear from 6 of those pioneers to my left in what I'm sure will be a fascinating panel discussion, the success of which depends on your engagement and your getting involved in the Q&A session. So we're counting on you all to participate. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the moderator of our panel discussion, Patchen Barss, a Toronto-based journalist and author. Patchen has worked for the Montreal Gazette, the National Post, and also for Nautilus Magazine and Scientific American. From 2006 to 2011, he served as communications director for the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, an organization that, as many of you know, has funded many of our faculty over the years. Patchen wrote the feature article in U of T magazine that inspired this event. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Patchen Barss.
Thanks, Sven. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks, everybody, for coming. As I was getting ready for this panel, I was thinking about how different it would be if the group of people who were here came from any other discipline than computer science. And if you had a group of cosmologists who were here and you were asking them, what was the universe like 50 years ago? What is it like now? What will it be like in 50 years? Their answer would be pretty much the same, more or less. Changed a lot during the first few instances, but since then it's been pretty steady as it goes. And it's one of the things that I think is so fascinating about the field of computer science is that the very things that you're studying are constantly transforming. Things that were impossible or at least unimaginable even a decade ago become commonplaces at this point. And one of the things that I was recalling a conversation with another computer science faculty member who isn't here tonight, but Jeffrey Hinton, some of you will know, an artificial intelligence researcher, was talking to me once about how if he had launched a machine learning program on a state-of-the-art computer in 1986 when he was first doing serious research, and let it run continuously from then until now, and then started the same program running on the computer that he had in his office, the amount of time it would take for the new computer to catch up to the work having been done by the old computer was less than an afternoon. So that's just one sign of how quickly things have changed. And another thing that occurred to me was my first real job in journalism was working as a technology and culture columnist for the Montreal Gazette. And it was in the years 1993, 94, a time when you could write a whole column devoted to explaining that hardware is the box and software is the stuff that goes inside the box that does things. And another thing that you could write about then, and I did this a number of times, you could ask the very valid question in a column. The internet, is it really a thing, or is it just a playground for nerds and pornography fans? And I don't think there's anybody who was working then who could have predicted, that was just 20 years ago, I don't think there's anyone who could have predicted that what was then really just a hotbed of Star Trek fan fiction and porn sites, that it would transform into a hotbed of Star Trek fan fiction, porn sites, and cat videos. So it's another example of just how quickly things change. So, and I think that's what makes tonight's conversation really so interesting. I'm so glad to be a part of it. So here's how it's going to work tonight. So each of the 6 panelists is going to make some very short remarks. I think they would describe them as painfully short. But we really want everybody to just essentially create a conversation starter about their idea about the future as they see it. And we want to get as quickly as possible to the part of the evening where you get to participate, where you ask questions. The talk should take about a half-hour total, and then we'll have time for Q&A, and we're hoping to wrap up at about 6:15. We might have to push that a little bit so that we can get to the reception that's going to follow by about 6:30. Now, the other thing that I would say that makes this conversation particularly interesting is I've been to a lot of futurist type panels before. What is really interesting is that this isn't a group of people who are just trying to guess what the future might look like. These are people who are trying to create that future. And the tools and the toys, the things they're going to be talking about tonight, those are all things that we're all going to use. We're all going to experience them. And I think that's a really valuable thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about what kinds of questions you might like to ask when we get to the Q&A part of the show. And now we will get on with the show. So Eugene Fiume is the first up. Eugene researches computer graphics, things like computer animation and modeling natural phenomena, things like illumination. So Eugene, tell us what the future looks like to you.
Thanks, Patchen. Great to see everybody. And I see, for example, the person who hired me, Derek. Call it to you. I've been here a while, and it's just wonderful to see the cycles and the various kinds of research that we've been up to. I haven't really changed my stripes much. I'm just interested in how things look. And as a consequence, there is this neuroplasticity that starts playing out, in which I look at everything and think about how to model it. Even my drinking bottle there plays off and gets all sorts of caustics and shadows, and I actually lose sight of the fact I'm supposed to be drinking water from it. So there are things that you do as a computational realist that are a little different than, I guess, everyday life. But the idea is to bring visual communication through, in my case, through realism, to the everyday person, so that ultimately people can express themselves visually in any kind of virtual world they want. I'll talk a little bit about that. One of the things that is wonderful about computer graphics in general is just how it interacts with everything. Just about every walk of life is a place where you learn something about visual depiction. So art and design, architecture, social scientists, archaeologists, computational physicists, biologists, and so on. We all have something to learn from there. And I can point to specific things such as modeling virtual humans, modeling skin, modeling comets that have little satellites that land on them. There's a whole set of things that computer graphics interacts with that allows you not to have to make that early decision in life, namely that one of, do I want to go for something I really want to do or something that makes me a living? You can combine these things in this field. So that's kind of an advertisement for my field. So one of the things that is often thought about in terms of what computer graphics is that computer graphics is not really about display screens. It's not really about displays per se. Just as computer science is not about that shiny laptop that's kind of made out of kind of aluminum and has little logos and has big lineups for its acquisition. Computer science is about models, and so is computer graphics. So what do we do in computer graphics? We model, in my case, model natural phenomena and hope somehow that that integrates into something. So the difficulty of my field is that when it comes to approximating reality, it's a little like seeing someone wearing an ill-fitting garment. If you just look the right way, it kind of looks okay, but you always know it's a little bit wrong. And most aspects of computational visual realism feel that way. As soon as you get an eye for something, it looks wrong. The problem is we want to do this in real time, and that itself is a highly elusive goal. And one of the things that we are getting toward is understanding more about kind of that one-way path. How can we go from scenes and to kind of depict things and make them go reasonably quickly? But the future brings something a little different, namely it closes the loop, and that's why graphics is not about display screens. It's about some mechanism to do visual characterization, and the output may be a screen, it might be video, it might be a photo, but it might be 3D fabrication, and there's a variety of different things that the models that we make do. Where we're going, it's pretty clear over the next couple of years anyway, maybe the next 10, is the augmentation of synthetic computer graphics with real-life data. So we're seeing a lot of play happening right now in industry. In fact, industry's probably taking the lead here because they're building business models before they have the technology, which is the case. But the idea is to synthesize and augment synthetic, so create the augmentation of synthetic systems and real systems. That's called augmented reality. It's gotten a pretty good buzz in the last couple of years. We're seeing the emergence of synthetic data that is approximating the real life channels of data, with this idea that with the right hardware we can actually create a combined experience that goes beyond any one of those two channels. Now there's some problems with that. One is that it leads us into a funny place. It leads us to a place where all of these media are completely persistent and completely continuous. So as we deal with the continuity of these things, we have to deal with the fact you're always wearing a headset. In order to make things go quickly, you typically have to put the computational power close to your head, which means it gets hot, which means you sweat, which means that headsets kind of get icky. So there are a lot of basic wearability issues, but there's a deeper social issue in terms of how we dissociate or associate with the world. So I think the future questions that we really want to ask about computer graphics actually are more societal questions about how this technology is helping us to solve problems, but at that same time introduce potentially this notion of isolation from your immediate physical world. And we can talk about that later. Thank you.
Thanks, Eugene. So Paul Gries is he's a devoted educator. He is an award-winning teacher. In 2012, he became an instructor for one of U of T's first MOOCs. That's a massive open online course. And MOOCs are one of the ways that computer science is already transforming the world of education itself. And Paul, tell us more about this aspect of the future as you see it.
Evening, everybody. Back in 2005, I went to investigate this fancy new MIT online lecture stuff that they were videotaping and posting as many of their lectures as they could. And I wanted to see how they taught their introductory course. So I go there, I watch the video, and I'm completely uninterested in it. And one of the reasons I was reflecting on back then was that it's not interactive. I was just passively watching. There was no chance for me to give any sort of feedback or test myself or anything. I was just watching the lecture, and that's, for 2005, that was great, but I didn't find it gripping. Isaac Pitman, back in the 1840s, actually started one of the first distance learning courses by teaching shorthand by transcribing lectures onto postcards, mailing them to students. They'd mail postcards back with their attempted shorthand, and he'd send them back with his corrections. So he actually, back in the 1840s, had more interaction than there was in MIT's first attempt at online learning. Now, they've gone a lot farther. With edX and Coursera, they're way more interactive. You watch a video, every now and then a multiple choice question will pop up, you answer it. If you get it right, that's great. If not, you have a chance to rewind the lecture and watch it again. So this interactivity is way more interesting, but I still think it's not enough. one of the frustrations that I ran into when I was teaching my Coursera course with Jennifer Campbell was that students would complain that we didn't cover enough of the prerequisite material. And then there would be this long argument in the discussion forum where other students would respond saying, actually, I found this excruciatingly boring because he said the information in the first 2 sentences and I didn't need any more. And that leads me to adaptive learning, where a learning system will adapt to the skills of the learner and roll back to the prerequisite material as the person struggles and fast forward when that isn't necessary. So I think that the next wave of Coursera and edX is going to be getting a little bit of this adaptive learning systems in place. But even that isn't enough, I think, because one of the big surprises, possibly my biggest surprise with teaching the Coursera course, was the plethora of student learning groups that just grew organically. We had the Greek discussion board, we had the Russian discussion board, we had Google groups and Facebook groups springing up left and right. We had meetups in Toronto and meetups in Texas and meetups all around the world because students want to learn together. We need a community. We need to figure out how to reproduce that better, I think, in online learning. And so with augmented reality, with the Oculus Rift, where you get to actually pretend to be somewhere else, I can imagine 25 years from now, rather than a student coming downtown to watch a lecture, they'll put on their their 7th generation Oculus Rift. They'll plug in, they'll have a 30-second commute to put on the headset and plug in, and then they will be in virtual reality, sitting in front of the professor much closer than you are there in the back row, because everybody's all together, just as close as the pedagogy drives. Now, there will be in a group of 10 people, 15 people, and that's all they'll see. They won't need to see the 200 people in the room. This allows us now to have spin-out groups. The professor will teach a concept and say, here's a problem, and maybe the professor will throw the problem out there, it'll appear on everybody's virtual screens, and then the students will automatically form into groups and start interacting. Whenever there's a problem, they'll raise their haptic sensor glove finger, and the TA, one of the TAs will go and actually know which student group has a question, and then immediately be able to address the student who has the question, while this is going on virtually all around the world. So I think that we're going to start to lose lecture halls. We'll still have fun events like this so that we can go next door and drink afterwards. But I think that the necessity of the large interactive classrooms is going to start to wane. I think there's a lot of use in actually having somebody on the stage pontificating, but there's way more use. I think we're going to do better by this virtual reality interaction with adaptable learning resources that are immersively interactive. And there you have it.
Thanks so much. So one of the other, let's be real, there are other benefits to the internet, and one of the great benefits of the internet is that it can really fuel latent hypochondria, in the sense that if you have a cold and type in your symptoms to a search engine, you will soon discover, you will self-diagnose as having a combination of Ebola and gout. And that is for people like me, but for people like Michael Brudno, computer science opens the door to kinds of diagnosis that are actually much more rigorous and much more sophisticated. And in particular, Mike focuses on rare genetic diseases. And Mike, come up and tell us about the future of that. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. So I work in what I would say is computational medicine, which is bringing together the tools that we've been developing in computer science over the past 50 years and using them to solve medical problems. This includes tools from all areas. It includes user interfaces to help collect clinical data from the doctor and put it into then a large database that may store the data, which will then feed into maybe some vision algorithms if you're dealing with medical images, and then gets combined with other kinds of symptoms using machine learning techniques in order to create outcomes that can then be fed back into a user interface to the clinician to help them make a decision about how a patient should be treated. Note, it's not getting rid of the doctor. Computers aren't going to be good enough to actually diagnose you in the near future. They're going to help the doctor make sure they don't overlook symptoms that they should be looking at, that they are taking into account the full wealth of information, that they know what tests have been run, what tests haven't been run, and use this information in the most effective way. In my own field, which is rare genetic diseases, it's actually a very good test bed for lots of the things that can be developed because it's an extremely difficult area. Patients, there are thousands of genetic diseases. You know, some say 10,000, some say 20,000. Many of these are 1 in a million kind of people, so there may be 10 such people with this disease in Canada. Your doctor may have never seen such a disease, or they may have seen one such case and they just don't recognize it. So it's very important, you know, to help diagnose these. It's very important to find 2 cases with the same cause of the disease. Now, how do these cases get found? We have developed a system to connect clinicians they enter data about their patients, and they get connected based on the fact that patients share symptoms or they have mutations in the same parts of the genome. The system has been starting to get used and is being used very effectively. But probably one of the most powerful examples of these, this matchmaking happening was actually when they had sequenced the case at Stanford, and they identified, oh, it's probably this gene, but we can't be sure because we have never actually seen another patient with a change in the genome in this gene. And then, completely independently, at Duke, they also sequenced a case which had a mutation in that gene. So the way they actually were able to find out about each other was that the parents found each other online. Not by the doctors talking, by the parents talking. So this actually drives a point about community and privacy, that in the future, patients will be creating communities online centered around their diseases. They will be communicating with each other in order to help diagnose themselves. They will be feeding their latent hypochondria in groups rather than individually. And this actually is going to be a very important step moving forward in that these, by yourself, you look at your symptoms and you may think that you have Ebola. But if you're the only person in the world who thinks that they have Ebola based on these symptoms, you're probably wrong. But if you're actually in a group and you see others with the same symptoms, there's actually a chance that you may be right, and you need to actually look at who are the doctors you're seeing. Are they the same ones? Can you tell each other about the cases? So really, this goes forward to how I see computational medicine developing. There's going to be a much stronger engagement of the patient in their own healthcare through online groups in which eventually I think patients will participate directly. I think as groups, as companies like Facebook and Google have found out, people are very willing to give up their privacy if they see a return on this. And I think this will happen with medicine as well. It's also going to be a big change in how doctors treat their patients because they will be starting to aggregate the big data in order to help diagnose. We need to be building systems that take into account not just 1 or 2 of these, not just a machine learning algorithm for better diagnosis. Doctors won't use it because the system won't have the relevant data inside to begin with. You need the user interface so that they can build the data. You need the machine learning so that they can improve, so that it actually feeds back to the doctor and gives them suggestions. You need, obviously, the storage technologies and everything else that brings it all together. So in the future, as I see it, I think I see all of these very different sub-areas of computer science being researched by very different people right now, coming together in order to really change how doctors are treating their patients.
So I have 2 sons. They are 2 years old and 3 years old. Reputable sources have told me that they might never need to learn to drive because by the time they are of driving age, it may well be that cars are driving themselves. So Raquel Urtasun studies machine learning and computer vision and robotics, and she knows more than a little about autonomous driving. So, Raquel, what is the future as you see it?
Thanks, and thank you everyone for coming here. More than 1 million people are killed every year due to traffic accidents. In Canada alone, this is 2,000 deaths. Despite many technological developments, this number remains constant. Part of the problem is due to the increasing population in the suburbs, the highest in Canada, with 8.7% versus 5% in city centers. According to the NIH, 74% drove a vehicle to work, which accounts for 11.4 million Canadians, a third of the population. Pollution and driver stress are two other important negative factors that one should not forget. My research consists on developing visual perception algorithms that can understand the 3D world as well as human does, and can plan the necessary actions for autonomous driving to accomplish their goals: planning, collision avoidance, refueling, etc. These autonomous systems can lower the risk of accidents, can provide mobility for the elderly and people with disabilities, and can decrease the pollution for a healthier environment, thereby directly benefiting society as well as the health and well-being of Canadians. However, most current solutions are expensive. They require the use of LiDAR and dedicated maps, which makes this technology potentially available only to a few. My research goal is to develop cost-effective solutions using visual information and freely available data, for example, maps, such that I can bring this technology to each and every one of you. Towards this goal, two components are important: computer vision and machine learning. First, we need to develop computer vision algorithms that are able to understand and extract semantic and geometric information from images in order to perform tasks such as navigation and 3D scene understanding. Second, we need to learn good representations that allow us to do efficient inference and to be able to meet the real-time requirements of autonomous systems. The revolution of self-driving cars is soon to come, maybe much sooner than you think. And I hope that UFT, the City of Toronto, as well as Canada, can play a fundamental role in this revolution. Thank you.
So self-driving cars are, of course, one manifestation of artificial intelligence, and then that's something that's transforming many different fields. Next up is Sheila McIlraith. And Sheila, can you tell us a little bit about where your artificial research intelligence is now and what you think it holds in store for the future?
Thanks, Patchen. So it's actually a pleasure for me to be here and to participate in this panel for a couple of reasons, not only because I'm a DCS faculty member, but also I'm a DCS alumna. I actually graduated from the Department of Computer Science with a PhD in 1997. And with that degree in hand, I left Toronto for California for a great research job. It's actually interesting, when I was reflecting on the future, I was reflecting back on that time. And in 1997, just to set the stage of how long ago that was, mobile phones were still the size of sort of small shoe phones. And Google was still a very large number. Just a very large number that most people didn't know about. But things were to change very quickly, and they did. You know, later on in 1997, IBM's Deep Blue program, that chess-playing program, beat world chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov at chess. In 2011, IBM's Watson program, of course, beat the Jeopardy champions at their game, and we've had significant advances since that time. The deep learning work, much of it revolutionized, much of it pioneered at the University of Toronto, has revolutionized language translation and also language understanding. And autonomous vehicles are actually here in some places already in a restricted form. Computing is now pervasive. Connectivity is pervasive, and connectivity is perpetual. I don't know about you. We were asked to turn our phones off, which of course was a difficult thing to do. So Patchen asked us how our research was going to influence the future. And one of the areas where my research and the research of my students and colleagues is influencing the future in the short term is with respect to the development of personal assistants. I'm sure that many of you have cell phones or some sort of other connectivity device and that you use it to search for information on the web. Maybe some of you even use Siri to ask questions. So you can think about the web as being like a big information source or a big sensor that gives you information about things that are not within your field of view. But if you think about what we're going to be connected to in the future, if you think not just of the web or the internet, but of the Internet of Things, of the cloud, then you can think of that connectivity not just as a large information store, but actually more like a distributed robot with sensors and with actuators. We aren't just going to use our mobile devices to gain information. We're also going to use our mobile devices to do things, to affect change in the world. We do that now. We book hotel reservations, we buy books online, but in the future we will be able to do that in a much more developed way through the use of this, if you think about it, a metaphorical carpenter, a carpenter that has many, many tools at his or her disposal and that uses its creativity to compose those things together in order to create new things in the world. So there are lots of challenges to building such a metaphorical carpenter, you know, or a personal assistant. And it's easy to imagine, many of you I know in the audience are computer scientists, it's probably easy to imagine building a personal assistant, but it's actually hard to build a really good personal assistant that you would entrust with your affairs. And the reason for that is that a really good assistant knows you better than you know yourself. They know when you like to get up in the morning, they know whether you like to sit in the aisle seat or the window seat, they know your husband's schedule and who does what on which days. A personal assistant, a good personal assistant, also has some level of common sense knowledge. If you think about a personal assistant that's going to purchase something for you, so for example, what we do now is we buy a book at Amazon.com, for example, that personal assistant will not only know how to fill in the form for you, but it will also know that your credit card is going to be charged by the amount of the purchase that you made, and that you're going to have to pay that credit card out of your bank account that may or may not have enough money to pay for it. It will also know that the item that you purchase is going to be delivered, maybe nowadays by drone, to the address that you provided. So there are lots of interesting challenges to actually building good personal assistants, but the thing that computers are good at is optimizing large quantities of data. And that's what these personal assistants will be able to do, to relieve us of the hours and hours that we spend poring over options to try to optimize our life. Many of those things will be done by personal assistants in the future. And I think we're very close to that now. I wanted to end actually not with a sort of prediction for the future, but rather as to give a challenge to the audience, and particularly to the students in the audience. So AI is so much in the media these days. It's in the movies. It's in books. It's everywhere, and there are lots of prognostications that the singularity is coming, and that we will have an AI, whatever that means, at some point in the near future. But there's some fundamental challenges that remain, and one of them is endowing computers with common sense. We all have it. Nobody told it to us. We all have it. We all use it. And even our 4-year-olds, our little children, have common sense the ability to do common sense reasoning. And yet it's something that has been elusive with respect to artificial intelligence. Being able to build a computer that can answer simple questions, and like, can I make a salad out of a polyester shirt? Can I pierce a turnip with a pin? Can an alligator run a steeplechase, which is Hector Levesque's favorite question? How will we design machines so that we can actually answer these very simple questions? And what's it going to take? For all you smart students in the audience, what are you going to do to make that happen?
So we're already at our final speaker for the evening. Steve Easterbrook studies complex system behavior, and that has meant everything from analyzing safety for NASA missions to studying how climate models are built. And his work aims to use complex computer models, these are exact words, to help us make wise choices about living sustainably. So I assume that his vision for the future is that everything's going to be just fine. So, Steve.
Well, thank you for that. So they made me promise when they put me on last that I wouldn't spend the whole time spreading a message of doom and gloom. So just a small one, maybe. There's some bad news and there's some good news. As computer scientists, we are remarkably bad at reasoning about the broader social and environmental impacts of our technology. We're maybe good at thinking at what I might call the first order impacts. So not to pick on anyone in particular, but let's go for the self-driving cars. Sorry, Raquel. Self-driving cars. So what are the first order impacts? Well, that's the immediate benefits when we introduce that technology. Things like an immediate reduction in traffic accidents, an immediate reduction of all that stop-start nonsense out on the freeways as drivers keep overreacting to each other. And that's great. Second order impacts are a little harder to think about. Those are the longer term as we keep using this technology over the long term and we adapt our behavior to it. Things like, well, we'll change what we think about as car travel. Our cars will become maybe mobile offices or enclosed entertainment centers because we don't have to pay attention to the road anymore. And we'll rethink what driving even means. But the third order impacts are the ones that concern me most. That's what happens when you reason about the aggregated impact of a very large number of people using this technology over time. So for example, if the self-driving cars suddenly make driving much more pleasant, much more enjoyable, and we can pack far more cars on the road, what does that do to the aggregate fuel demand? And therefore, what does that do to our carbon emissions, for example? They're likely to go way up. We're likely to want to drive more places. And that's something that's really hard for us to reason about. So on the subject of climate change then, if we think about what the impact of computer technology is on climate change, there's a number that most people that have asked this, if they are able to answer at all, will say, we've seen this figure of 2%. The computer technology contributes about 2% of global carbon emissions. And we say, okay, all right, that doesn't sound very much of a problem. If we're trying to reduce carbon emissions, it's clearly somebody else's problem. It's not our problem. Unfortunately, we've been lulled into a false sense of security because that number is growing rapidly. It's expected, the carbon footprint of computing is expected to double by 2020, double again by the mid-20s. It's rising exponentially at a time when countries of the world are signing agreements to say we're going to start bringing our carbon emissions down steadily over the next few years. And there's even worse news than that, because that 2% figure is completely wrong. Okay? That 2% figure is calculated by just looking at the energy consumption of our computers while we're using them. It does not account for the manufacture. And computer technology is unusual compared to almost anything else that we buy that consumes power, in that the bulk of the carbon emissions from this technology is in the manufacture. In almost everything else we buy, it's in the use. So for example, cars and fridges, it almost always makes sense when they start to age to throw them out and replace them with the newer energy efficient models because the net impact on the environment is reduced. That is not true for computers. The moment that you buy it, you've already incurred the majority of its lifetime carbon footprint. We shouldn't be throwing them away and replacing them for energy efficient models. We'll never recoup the loss. And of course, the computer industry is pushing us ever faster to keep throwing them away and replacing them with cool new models because of all the cool new apps and all the cool new things that they can do. So that's the bad news. We're actually a major part of the problem. The good news is computer technology is also a major part of the solution. And maybe I'll just give you one idea for how that is. It's essentially dematerialization. Computer technology allows us to remove a lot of the physicality and therefore a lot of the environmental impact of many of the things we do. Take travel, for example. Instead of having to drive to campus, our students can use virtual classrooms. Instead of having to get into the self-driving cars and drive to work, people can meet their colleagues through virtual environments. Instead of having to manufacture goods on the other side of the world and ship them here, we just send the instructions and manufacture them locally. Or we get rid of the need for the physical goods altogether, which we've already done for digital music. Increasingly, we're doing it for things like books, and we'll find other ways of removing the need to even create the physical things that constitute a large part of our environmental footprint. So for the future then, one of the things that we as computer scientists, I think, are going to have to get to grips with is we can't just design stuff that we think is going to be cool. We're going to have to design stuff that starts to steadily reduce our global impact on the environment.
So I'm going to stay seated at this point because now we're going to open the floor to questions. I'm going to point out, have we got a mic for Joseph? Okay, so Joseph will be our mic runner tonight. If you have a question that you'd like to ask of any or all of the panelists, try to catch Joseph's eye, and he will bring the mic in your direction. We would ask that, especially since we're running just a tiny bit late, please try to keep your questions as short as possible. I'll also remind the panelists when you're answering, please try to keep your answers succinct as well. If you have a question that you want to direct at a particular panelist or panelists, please feel free to say so, though I warn you others may jump in. With that, are there any questions?
Follow your example and stay seated. My question is directed specifically to Ms. McIlraith regarding the use of digital assistants. It seems to me that a lot of the research on digital assistants has been on what they can do and what answers they can provide, and not very much attention has been paid on the actual user interface and how you put get the questions in and how you actually interact with them. Could you possibly comment on that area?
Does my mic? Okay, good. Yeah, so I certainly there hasn't been as much work on interfaces, and I think that right now when one envisions a personal assistant, one imagines using something that's akin to Siri or some other device where we might use language or audio in order to have the interface. But I think one of an important aspect of the future will be how we interact with the machines around us, not just in a manner such as using a telephone, but one can imagine in one's home. If one's home is instrumented so that it can communicate with us, and we might want to talk to our telephone or our television or various other devices, and so there will be a variety of new modalities that we'll have to develop in order to deal better with our digital assistants. I don't know that that answers your question. Yeah.
Okay, back when I started programming and we were carving programs on stone tablets, a good programmer could carve out maybe a 10,000 line program, and that was considered pretty big. Now, software is enormous. Even a word processor like Word is excess of 150 million lines of source code. We're running out of complexity. We don't know how to deal well with that level of software complexity. Is there any hope of either for any new kind of programming scheme that will help us get the functionality we want without the software complexity that we need to make it work right now?
Who'd like to take that?
Who's going to take that?
I can do it for computer graphics systems, and maybe people can extrapolate. So I took time out in the 90s and to work with a computer graphics company and a computer graphics tools company. And we certainly faced this problem of developing features that were constantly added on, and we almost never removed features, we always added. And as a consequence of that, we found this idea of feature creep causing a huge code bloat. So this is not a new problem, Dave. It's been really happening. One of the things that I discovered as part of that is I ran a usability engineering group, and I would have paid tuition to have managed them. They were just amazing. They taught me about this idea of the use of programming, not just from a interactive system component, from a human-computer interaction component, but from overall workflow and the use of tools in a larger kind of environment. And they. I think there is, so the short version of this answer is I think there is hope when the human is in the loop and the human can, is able to customize their interaction with this software environment, not just a single piece of software. So I think it's less about lines of code. It's more about interaction, complexity, and workflow. And I do think that there is hope as we develop a better usability engineering discipline in addition to a software engineering discipline.
Anyone else have anything to add to that? So I had just a little bit of a follow-up question to that, which I'm not sure who I'm going to put on the spot for this, possibly Sheila. But one of the other things, speaking as a non-programmer, is it feels to me, having written about advances over the past 20 years, that there is a level of complexity in the activities that computers carry out, that we all know the things that we're much better at doing than computers, but it feels to me, especially in realms like big data and machine learning algorithms, that there are things computers are getting good at that they're much better than us at, and that's always been the case to a certain degree, but it seems as though a lot of the very interesting insights that are coming out as a result of this transformation are the insights are coming from the machinery rather than from the researchers now. And I wonder if you see that as a trend, and if you see it as a trend, if you see it as in any way a problem. And this isn't just for you, Sheila, but I thought you might have something to say about it.
Yeah. So, well, maybe I'll let someone else answer.
Okay,
yeah,
sure, absolutely. Michael, you were the other person I was thinking about this because, and I say this because Michael said in his talk, this isn't meant to replace the doctors and the diagnosticians in the near future, which I always take as code for it's going to replace them. So I wonder, Michael, if you could talk about it from the perspective of, does a doctor become disempowered as computers get better at doing the diagnosing?
I actually think they get empowered to concentrate as things that they're really good at and stop doing things that they're not good at or that they don't like doing. As part of developing of the system, one of the things that we built of the system that we built for rare disorder clinicians, we did something really simple. We put in ability to enter height, weight, and head circumference and added growth charts so that you can see how the patient fits relative to baseline. Doctors loved it. It took away a procedure that took them also a minute into something that took 10 seconds, but they hated just getting out a piece of paper and plotting data on it. It lets the doctor concentrate into what they're good at and not what they're not, and it lets them concentrate on things they like doing. So I actually think it was not code for that they're going to be replaced. I think it's code for they're going to concentrate on things that they should be concentrating on. I mean, similar to how, I tend to think of it as similar to how autopilots fly airplanes. We don't get rid of the pilot. The pilot is still there. The pilot is necessary for when things go wrong and for other critical components of flight, but most of the boring job is done by the autopilot. The pilot doesn't have to sit there and hold the stick, the shift steady for 13 hours from Beijing to Toronto.
If I may now, there's actually an interesting area of research that's fairly new called human computation that is looking at where the line is between what humans are good at computing or reasoning about and where the machine should step in and where that line is. And it's actually interesting because as I talk to some of the researchers who are working in this area, of course, some of them are interested in squeezing out just the slimmest amount that the person needs to do relative to what the machine can do. And as our machines do become more powerful and powerful, it is the case that I certainly see Michael's point, but it must be the case that some of the interesting things or the challenging things or the fun things may go away as well, and that speaks to the quality of people's jobs or their enjoyment of their jobs.
Is it on? One thing that I was surprised to not hear about was 3D printing and how that would affect, it's just the industry of like manufacturing and even some inventors and prototyping, actions that, I think the general public has more access to. I'm not sure who this is directed to exactly, but I think Eugene put his hand up.
So I did indicate that the computer graphics was not about displays. In fact, the fundamental abstractions of computer graphics and computer-aided geometric design are really three-dimensional or high-dimensional models. So the notion of an output device being something that kind of carves or layers a three-dimensional tool or other artifact is certainly part of the workflow. There are lots of interesting possibilities in kind of 3D fabrication. Some of the questions now are whether it will turn into today's version of inkjet printing, where the materials they get up to snuff, but they don't get quite high enough. But that's really more about the specific kind of printing technologies we have now. I mean, now there are services that'll print various kind of metals and do a variety of carving as well as printing. So there's a lot to be said in kind of the custom manufacture space. There are pretty significant industries that are now developing in that area. And in fact, some traditional industries from computer-aided design are moving into this kind of custom fabrication space. So there's huge potential for it, but I see it as another outgrowth of kind of the interaction of design, computer graphics, and human-in-the-loop output. It's going to happen.
So actually also a big role for 3D printing in medicine. There are already examples of 3D printing of body organs. Usually for now, heart tissues, bones, cartilage. There was a case, I think a year ago, where they 3D printed a thorax for a baby and actually put it in. Then the baby's own cells formed around it, and then basically the plastic that they put in was dissolved by the body and expelled. So this is happening. They're talking about 3D printing potentially livers. That's still a little bit further out there. It's definitely going to happen. Today they're using 3D printed tissues in order to train surgeons. So they will 3D print a cleft palate and train a surgeon to repair it on the plastic, so that they don't have to do it on a live person. So it's definitely going to be huge.
So can I add to that? So I think 3D printing is an exciting version of the dematerialization that I was talking about. So, and I've seen several fascinating examples of this. One is you've got a large consumer good that you've bought, and a little plastic widget on it breaks. And at the moment, you can't buy those replacements. You end up throwing out the whole thing and replacing it. What you do is now you wheel out your 3D printer and you print the little replacement piece of plastic. You've saved throwing away a large device. Or the idea that instead of our stuff being manufactured in China and shipped over here, we make it locally. The downside to that, though, is if you've ever hung around 3D printers and seen the 3D print shops, they are absolutely surrounded by junk bits of plastic that were misprinted or whatever. And it's exactly the same as, when desktop computing came in, it was supposed to usher in the paperless office. What it has actually ushered in is the office that's absolutely stuffed with bits of waste paper that we've printed and thrown away when we shouldn't have done. And my worry is 3D printing might end up much more like that rather than the one that actually improves things.
I think the area of building to specific tolerances is a tricky one as well. I mean, manufacturing processes are, you know, we can complain about things coming from specific countries, but presumably they were sourced with respect to a certain tolerance. And one of the issues I think that does need to be addressed in this one-off style 3D printing and fabrication is how one can print with a clear sense of the kind of the stress tolerance of these particular parts or livers or whatever they might be.
I've lost track of Joseph.
Hi. So my question is about the social impacts. So Steve was earlier talking about the sort of first order, second order, third order impacts, but he was talking about the environmental impacts. And many of these technologies that we've been talking about today will have social impacts, both good and bad. So to pick on Paul, for example, MOOCs attract an audience that is really just amplifying social inequalities in education. And what can we do to sort of address the sort of bad social effects that these technologies may have or prevent them from happening in the first place? And this is open to everyone, not just Paul.
So for those of you who aren't aware, the problem with MOOCs is that mostly very educated people participate. And by that I mean that I think something like a third of my students in my introductory programming course had a graduate degree. So we're teaching the people who already have what they want. And they are aware of all the opportunities that are out there. They have the internet connectivity and power to be able to go and take these courses. The rest of the developing world typically doesn't. I had a student from Ghana who was complaining about the 3-hour time limit on the final exam because she said that she didn't even have electricity for 3 hours a day. So she was never going to be able to finish the exam. So there is a whole bunch of infrastructure, costly, environmentally impactful infrastructure that I think needs to be built before we're going to be able to reach the teeming masses, if you will. And I don't know how to do that.
There's second, third, fourth order effects here that are really unpredictable. The social engineering, the inadvertent social engineering aspects of like these things. They're useful, but they're also incredibly coercive, and I think it's. I mean, your point is a really powerful one. I'm not sure we're particularly good, as Steve said, at modeling these things, but I think it is a source of real concern if we work in isolation. I'm not even sure that if we work collaboratively, we'll actually be able to predict it, but it's certainly a better try than just putting a few people in a dark room.
Do we have another question? Ah.
Does this work like this? I'm curious about the role of mathematics as we sort of go into these areas of artificial intelligence and artificial reality and especially medicine. Is mathematics becoming more important in computer science or a limiting factor, or how do you view that?
Mm-hmm. I'll start, and then anyone else. In computer graphics, so one of the things, mathematics has always been an interesting bedfellow, as has physics and the other sciences, with respect to computer science, and it's particularly tricky within computer graphics. Computer graphics is largely about continuous systems. A lot of computer science is about discrete systems, so there's a difference in the kind of mathematics you might use. The barrier to entry in my field is becoming higher and higher because of the increased reliance on techniques from the mathematical sciences. So it is a tricky problem because we're expecting also increased level of aptitude in social sciences and in art. So you've got to have Renaissance people now at this stage. It's becoming difficult to attract people at the right level for my research area, and that may well be echoed by others.
So I believe that mathematics is the language of computer science, so it's a bit difficult to separate both, at least with respect to my area.
Mathematics is also, I would say, fundamental to artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. And to the study of complex systems. Maybe I should combine both of the last two questions, the social impacts and mathematics. One of the things that we've started to look at, I'm teaching a course at the moment about the social environmental impacts of the internet. And one of the things we've discovered is students' increasing inability to master topics like mathematics because of the endless distraction of the internet and their always-on lifestyles. They can't focus. And there is a very significant worry that actually we're relying more and more on Google to answer questions that we might have to have previously done a little bit of mathematical thinking for, and we just steadily get worse and worse at actually doing the math.
So let me disagree slightly, at least for my area. In computer science, we learn a lot about abstraction. And, it's where it really, the border between mathematics and computer science lies. I think some of it is a matter of abstraction. So, for example, as computer scientists, we rarely today think about transistors, something that probably 50 years ago, every computer scientist thought very deeply about, or flip-flops, or even registers probably aren't very relevant to anybody who programs, or most people who program today. There'll still be people for whom it's relevant. In my field, it's quite possible to abstract away even a whole sub-area. I need a database. I need it to have these functions. Do I really care how the database works under the hood? Not really, as long as I can interact with it. Similar, I could interact with, I need a clustering algorithm. I may need to understand a little bit how it works, but not really the deep mathematical details. So I think there is some abstraction that will happen with certain fields of mathematics that we will be able to say, well, that really is, it's a solved problem. There are tools that solve it for us, and we just use the tools without worrying how they work under the hood.
I think a particular sub-area of math, statistics and probability, is becoming more and more important, and students are struggling with it, especially in the social sciences. I hear constantly from the life sciences and so on that the students just don't really understand a distribution. They don't understand what tools they're supposed to apply to a set of data in order to extract the information they need in order to make progress. And this is for a first or a second year course. So I actually disagree a little bit. I think students need to be familiar with and have a good understanding, even an intuitive understanding of what statistics and probability means more and more as we get the big data that needs constant analysis.
Statistics, I would actually agree with that. That's actually becoming a huge part, and especially with large data. I think it really depends on the area of mathematics and some things that you may be able to abstract, like not to pick on Eugene, but maybe linear algebra. Is that really needed across the board?
I think I'll pass.
Okay. All right. So we are starting to get a little bit low on time, but we have time for a few more questions. So let's take one more from upstairs, and then we'll come down to the front after that.
I wonder if each of you very, very, very quickly, like one sentence utopian, one sentence dystopian, describe from your point of view what the best outcome you can see out of your research or research close to you in the next 10 or 20 years, and what maybe keeps you awake occasionally at night wondering, what have we done?
I'm going to suggest you do this in the same order that you spoke at the podium. Sorry, Eugene.
So realistic virtual environments that promote true harmony among people and communication. That's the positive. The dystopian is coercive social engineering that removes individual choice.
Wow. For me, restricting it to online education instead of the catastrophic future world that we're going to live in. I view the online education as a great leveler. I think that we're going to, hopefully within the next 25 years or so, be able to address the huge inequality that exists in online education just in terms of accessibility. And in my dystopian future, it's going to be used to keep the teeming masses down so that the elite can continue to know everything and control the world.
So I guess in the, the utopian vision is online communities dedicated to health professionals interacting closely with these online communities so that you don't need to go to your doctor for everything. You can actually communicate with your doctor who may be in a different country through your health community, which is dynamically changing as you the diseases which you may undergo changes, which you're undergoing change. The dystopian is these open communities being squished or destroyed by evil insurance companies, who are going to try to charge you, much heavier premiums depending on the information you reveal about yourself in such forums.
All right. So I guess positive for me will be if we can give mobility to everyone, right? No matter what the social status, how much you earn, which disability you have, or how do you feel that day. Negative side as anything related to AI, military use of technology for the wrong.
So for me, I guess the utopian vision would be that artificial intelligence would allow for great equalization among people who have perhaps disabilities or who have some impairment, that technology could augment them cognitively or physically so that they could operate within the world in a way that's equal with their fellow human beings, and that for everyone, that it would elevate the quality of their life, that it would elevate and elevate our economy. I guess the dystopian view, similar to some of the things that have been mentioned previously, is that technology will make the quality of our life less. It'll make our world less interesting. That it will make us as human beings less proficient at what we do, and that people who are, it will create a power. The ability for certain power brokers to enforce things that we as a society don't want.
I've spent much of my last 6 years hanging out with climate scientists. I am not going to describe the dystopian view. The utopian view is that we use this technology wisely. We start to understand how complex systems interconnect in so many ways that all of our problems to do with food security, climate change, clean water, clean air are all interconnected, and we have to tackle them all at once. And we roll out the right technologies fast enough that we get, really within the next decade, we start dramatically reducing year on year our carbon emissions.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I just wanted to ask a more prosaic question. We all use email to communicate, and yet we're all deluged by many messages we'd rather not gather. So my question is, do you think email will continue, or would artificial intelligence perhaps save us and organize our inbox?
I guess, well, I'll start. I guess it's on me. Yeah. So, yeah, I suggest the D key, but the delete key. No, so certainly you see it, and you can see the beginnings of it now. Absolutely, it's the case that artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques they're here. They're evolving right now to help go through mail, sift mail. Group it by topic, by importance, and that is part of the spectrum of the notion of a personal assistant that cleaning your email house will be part of that, prioritizing things. And I think that I don't think the general public has reached this point yet, but I know for many of my colleagues that we just don't read email now because we don't have time. And we suffer the consequences, and it becomes, there's a cultural evolution. People stop sending you email when they know you don't read it.
Our undergraduate students don't read email anymore. There's been a cultural shift, a generational shift. And I was having this conversation this morning. One of the reasons for that is that people increasingly now feel email is just broken. There is no way we can filter out the things that are intended for us and that are important for us to read from all of the other stuff that people can insert into our inboxes. We have no control over that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I think that the issue is that email, I actually don't have a problem with email. I kind of like it. But it's used in so many ways. So I think what we'll probably start doing is supplanting this idea of a continuous thread of conversation that becomes, because it's kind of hanging in your head, a continuum, versus the one-shot kind of thing. And I think what we'll probably see is simply the emergence of better stratified use cases, so that we can, that notion of deeper conversation probably moves more toward video conf or whatever, and these one-shot things probably, if they're short, they go into SMS. I think email is actually here to stay for quite some time, but I think it's going to be better. It's going to become a sharper tool in future.
So I think that one of the things that with the AI you have to think about is whether society will trust the machine, right? Whether you will trust the machine to actually read your important emails and to make decisions about your emails, right? Mm-hmm. And the same for autonomous driving, whether society is ready to trust a machine to drive you to work.
I think you're actually beginning to see it already. For example, if you use Gmail, one of the things you will see is when you get a message, you have an option to reply as chat. Mm-hmm. So if a conversation is really becoming a message a minute, well, maybe it's time to use that functionality. And I think yes, email will evolve, but I actually think it's here to stay, and it may not do it for you, but it'll empower you to say, well, this kind of message I actually think goes this way, and these are the spam messages I don't want to read, and these are just for my information messages that I want to be able to search, but I don't want to be able to see on day one. Yeah, smarter clients.
Okay, so that is unfortunately all the time we have. I want to thank all of the panelists for really thoughtful talks. I want to thank the audience for really thoughtful questions, and the panelists again for really thoughtful answers. I thought that was a great discussion. And there will be a reception afterwards, but just before that, I'd like to invite Sven back up to wrap things up for us.
Please tell me I can start deleting my email, Steve. Thank you. Wonderful panel, wonderful vision of the future, and wonderful job moderating. Thanks very much, Patchen. It's a really compelling vision you've heard today, and I guess the question is, how do we enable that vision? How do we support the future, the research that these faculty members are doing, and how do we realize our potential as a department to transform this university, as I mentioned in my opening remarks? We need the support from many people around, including the university, and there's good news on that front. As you know, our enrollments are increasing exponentially, and that's translating into new faculty lines for our department. Last year, we hired 4 junior faculty downtown, including Raquel as one of them. Great news. And this year, across the 3 departments in the Tri-Campus, Scarborough, UTM, and St. George, we're searching on 7 faculty lines, including 5 at St. George. So it's wonderful. That kind of growth is going to help us realize that potential. We also need help from our industrial partners. Eugene directs our professional master's program, which is growing and highly successful. We've got exciting new entrepreneurship initiatives. Mario, Helen, Steve, Paul, and others are working on those. And Gerald up there is helping manage many industrial partnerships, and we're hoping to grow that to help us move our department forward as well. We also need help from our alumni and friends, and I have some good news for you. Eugene and his family have generously donated $25,000 to establish the DCS Anniversary Graduate Scholarship Fund. Fantastic news. The news gets a little better. If we can somehow raise another $25,000, then we meet this magic threshold of 50, which entitles us to one-to-one matching from the Provost's office, which would allow us to achieve a $100,000 scholarship fund. And thanks to all the chairs in this department, they've rallied around Eugene and his family's seed gift, and the chairs and their families have helped us meet that threshold, so we now have a graduate scholarship fund that exceeds $100,000. So please join me in thanking all of the chairs and all of their families as well. In addition to the scholarship fund, we've also established a second fund, the DCS 50th Anniversary Innovation Fund, whose scope in terms of supporting both the research and the teaching mission is much broader. And we hope that in joining our celebration over the coming year and the future, we hope that you'll contribute to one of these funds or one of the other ways in which you can help us move forward and realize these visions to help our students and faculty have a world-class environment in which to discover, create, and succeed. I had to get the tagline in there sooner or later. And speaking of celebration, one more bit of good news to give you all, something I just heard yesterday, and that is for the first time in 50 years, we have now approval for all of our undergraduates to convocate together at the end of the year. Yeah. Fantastic news. And I have to say, I have to acknowledge the support of President Merrick Gertler, VP of Advancement David Palmer, and Arts and Science Dean David Cameron, who were all strongly behind this proposal and helped us achieve this goal. So it's a one-time only event. It's really exciting in honor of our celebration. So please, Kelly, announcement.
Today, Google announced, or the ACM announced, that Google has increased the Turing Award to $1 million. Incidentally, I tried when the Turing Fund got up to several hundred thousand, I tried to give them retroactively a fund to the previous winner who had received all of $1,000, at least bring them up to $25,000. But I wasn't able to do that. They said, you're just trying to help your friends, that's all.
Well, as Canada's only department, only CS department with a Turing Award winner, I'm confident that we'll be the second such recipient in this department before anyone else gets one. So hopefully that $1 million will come back to us, Kelly. So before we finish, a few words of thanks. Our anniversary series really wouldn't be possible without the help of a lot of people. I'd first like to thank the 50th Anniversary Planning Committee, with a special thanks to Sarah Burns, Sarah Franca, Orby Barboza-Cortez, Joseph Ragabar, who's been running around with the mic, Lloyd Smith, Linda Barnes, and Sarah Lavoie for all their help and efforts in making this launch event such a success. I'd also like to thank Monica Hom, Diana Cuprell, and Barrett Hooper from Arts and Science Advancement. They've been here all the way for us, helping us on all of our events, including this one, so we're always grateful for all their help and support. And finally, once again, a fantastic panel. It's a really busy time of year for all of them. Some of them have paper deadlines tomorrow, some have exams and whatnot, and yet they all came incredibly well prepared and shared really insightful visions for the future, and it was moderated by a true expert here. So please join me in one final round of applause for all of the people that have helped out, including our panel and moderator.